And I should just maybe also add in that I'm really pleased to be here with all of you. I'm speaking to you from the traditional unceded and ancestral territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Hulkamin and Ensign Chafflin speaking people. Okay, I think I've talked enough. I'm going to turn it over to Michelle.
Hello, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully it works out. Okay. All right, so hi, I'm Michelle Chu, as Susan mentioned, and I am a grade 7 late French immersion teacher. I teach in Burnaby, and I have been teaching about like 17, 18 years, I think. So when I first, I've always been interested in assessment. And so when I started to hear about using rubrics and descriptive language and moving away from point-based grading, moving towards proficiency scale language, I was really excited to jump on board with that, and experimented with that with all of my programming, and was really happy to do that. About 6 years ago, I started to change how I was teaching math. That's really when I started moving away from me giving the lesson and then modeling it together in front of the class with the students and getting the students to practice. And only in the past year or so have I really started to tinker with my assessment in math even more than what I was doing before. Because what I was finding was, even with the switch from counting up points and averaging points towards proficiency scale language, there were still gaps. There were things that I wasn't able to get across to the students, which was really annoying. Okay, it says that I've paused share screen. I'm not sure why. Okay. So I'm just going to show you some examples from my students about what I'm talking about. So on a quiz that I gave my students, I asked them to represent positive and negative numbers. And just some background for this. This year I tried using the hot and cold cubes, where there are some chefs in some magical land that if they add red cubes, they can bring up the temperature of the meal they're making. And if they add yellow cubes, they can bring down the temperature of the meal they're making without changing the flavor. However, without thinking about the colors used in those examples, the other examples I gave the students were actually the reverse of the colors. So I would use red for negative numbers and yellow for positive numbers. So when I gave them this quiz, I wrote up this question saying, using plus symbols and minus symbols, can you represent positive and negative numbers? Now, clearly, I didn't do a great job of laying that out for the students because I actually got a few different responses. So if we look at the example on the left-hand side, you can see that this student kind of guessed at what I wanted to do, and they showed positive and negative numbers. So they represented it. But then they went on and they also represented those their examples as addition statements. So they were actually showing me more than I asked them to do. So if I were trying to grade this using points, like, of course, yeah, it's a check mark, they got it right, yay. But that doesn't tell me that they were actually showing me two different skills, that they knew how to do two different parts of working with integers. And the student on the right-hand side didn't represent it with like a drawings. They actually just wrote the addition statements. And if I were doing points, I'd probably just give it to them because they did a good job. But again, it's not descriptive of what they're able to do. Are they able to show me in a visual form positive and negative numbers? And can they add positive, negative numbers? So being able to describe these using objectives is much more descriptive and helpful for me. This next example is one where I asked them to actually add positive and negative numbers. And this student didn't go all the way. They started with the visual representation, but that's where they stopped. And without further information, I don't know what they know about addition. If I were just using points, this is an X, and they'd get the question wrong, but it doesn't give me all that much information. And it doesn't actually allow me to say that at a basic level, they're able to represent positive and negative numbers. It just shows me that they got it wrong. And if I were to just say this is emerging, it also doesn't tell me what they're emerging at. It just tells me that I have in the past given the student an emerging. So again, showing where what I have is what I was using was not descriptive enough. I had a student teacher earlier on in the year, and she asked the students to do a project, and it was where they surveyed each other, and they represented their survey in a table form and circular graph. So they had to write down what fraction of students picked each question point or whatever, and then represent that as a percentage and a decimal, and then tell me how many, or tell her how many degrees in the circle it would represent. And the student on the left-hand side, you can see that in the first row of data, she got it all right, the 6 out of 20, but the second row, she said that 3/20 is 65%. But immediately beside that, it shows that she got the 1500s. So that makes me wonder if maybe she was just dans la lune and just wrote down the wrong thing. Now, I can't know without having a conversation with her, especially because a little bit later on, she writes down another data point of 6/20ths, but then she writes down 1300ths instead of 3/10ths, even though she had correctly written it 2 rows above. So definitely merits a conversation, but I can get more information from this and say, you know, on some level, she is able to show me that she can convert from fractions and decimals and percentages. And maybe in conversation, I can find out whether it was an error or if there's a lack of comprehension somewhere. But if I were just to give this, you know, checkpoints or X's, I would have to just count some of it wrong. But that doesn't help me later. Giving it a, you know, like minus, like taking off 2 points isn't going to help me. The student on the left-hand side made a mistake in saying that 10% is 1/100th. And again, this can be a pretty common misconception on students' parts. So I can't assume whether it was a writing mistake or a misunderstanding. That would be worth a conversation. But one of the other mistakes she did is she actually mixed up the data between Minecraft and Genshin. So she wrote them down in the wrong spots. So again, if I were using a proficiency scale or point system, I would be spending some time trying to figure out, like, how many points do I take off, or how can I describe this language-wise? But again, on objectives-based assessment, I can describe a little bit more in a more detailed way how she's doing. Over here, I had 2 more examples of the same project, and both of these students included something that they weren't asked to do. They didn't have to do it. They actually showed equivalent fractions. So they're going kind of above and beyond what they were supposed to do. But this is where, if I were marking with points, like let's say the total was 20, adding more points doesn't really help me. You know, giving them, you know, 21 out of 20, I don't know how that would help me. And going so far as to say, oh, well, they added extra detail, so maybe I should say it's extending, also isn't really helpful. If we look at the student on the left, what she did is she wrote equivalent fractions with the denominator of 100. And we started out with 20 kids. So that's not a huge leap. So it's not a particularly difficult equivalent, a set of equivalent fractions to find. And the student on the right-hand side simplified the fractions. And again, because we're working with a denominator of 20, it is not super complicated. So saying that they're extending because they showed an extra skill they didn't need to, actually it isn't describing the level of their skill. It's just they did more. So if I were just marking down what outcomes they showed me, I could check that off without having to give them the mark maybe that they're not really showing yet. So how do we do this? In Building Thinking Classrooms, book by Peter Loberdahl, he shows this table, and I definitely am inspired by it. So if you're not familiar with his work, you'll see letters on it, and they all represent different things. And I'll show you what my letters represent after. But The basis of it is that you take the big ideas in a unit and you kind of break them up to skills and whether they are basic, intermediate, and advanced. And as you see students perform these skills, you give them check marks. And 2 consecutive check marks basically shows that they got it. They have that concept. I think in his book, he talks about how they did do some research and some teachers went for more check marks and they actually found that it was extra information that didn't change the outcome. So 2 consecutive check marks is kind of I got it. And that if they got those 2 consecutive check marks in advanced, it kind of shows that they also have it at basic and intermediate levels as well. Now you can see on the right-hand side that they have the out of and a mark, and that's something I'm not going to talk about because I don't need to use it in my classroom because I don't have to turn what we do into a percentage, luckily. So what I use is something like this. So this is done in Google Sheets, and this is inspired by something that Richard DeMerchant shared. He shared this spreadsheet or a similar spreadsheet at a previous BCAMT assessment series session, and he graciously shared the document with me, and then I modified it to work for me. So I'm just gonna show you what I do. So over here is kind of my key. So the D and I found English equivalents, but I kind of did it for the French, but D is demonstrated. And I keep track of whether they showed me in a conversation, whether I observed them doing it or in writing. I use an E to show that they made an error, like a silly mistake. And A is help was given, aid was given. So they got there, but they got there either with my help or a friend's help. G is that they showed it in group work, and it's not super clear that they were the one kind of leading the charge. X is they didn't show me their understanding. They got it wrong. It wasn't there. And the P is that they passed on the question. So they say they didn't try it. And I'm just going to show you, hopefully it switches, what this looks like. So this is my spreadsheet. And on the first page is the proficiency scale language. And right now it's actually blank because I haven't been using that with my students. I haven't had to. But when I scroll down at the very bottom to different tabs, so this is student number 1 over here. And so student number 1 is a student who doesn't see herself as a math person, tends to freeze up when she encounters something she doesn't know. We spend a lot of time working on things one-on-one when we can. And so this is me just checking up things as you see it. And you'll see that I have things a little bit everywhere because I'm trying to interleave my units this year. So we're touching on some things, then moving on to something else. So we're kind of all spread out all over. So this is what it looks like. The Zoom settings are in my way. So I'm just going to skip to student 18 because I can see 18. And then here is a student who is a little bit more comfortable with math and showing their math understanding. And that's kind of what it looks like right now. So I would just click on something and then select from this menu what they've demonstrated to me. Now, all of this is tied to a second sheet that looks like this. So here is our student 1 again, and you'll see it shows the exact same information. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, under expectations, these are just ICANN statements showing the different skills that students are expected to show me through the year. So it's the same information, except I don't input it here. It just shows what was on the other sheet. And the reason why I have this is I go over to File, and I share it with others. Or actually, I should have put Publish to Web. Oops, sorry. Publish to web. And then I have a choice to save this as a web page or a PDF document. So what I do in my class is I share it as a web page. I take the URL and I add it to FreshGrade. So the students and their parents and guardians have access to it. And when they click the link, they see this. So it's the same idea, but they can't edit it. So the students can see what I'm seeing. And this changes as I make changes to my own spreadsheet. So that's kind of how I keep track. And what do I keep track of? I'm assessing our math talks and group work and consolidation. So that's the in-person stuff. So when we do math talks, for example, you know how sometimes students some of them, their answers really stand out, or they really show their understanding. I go, oh, great. And I kind of make a note of that and I write it down later. So after a math talk, I'm definitely not going to have information for every student, maybe one or two that really stand out, maybe not, depending on what kind of math talk it was. I assess our group work at the whiteboards as well, and the consolidation, because as we walk around, as different students explain either what they saw other students doing and why, or what they did, that's how I can see some things. I can also see when a student really isn't understanding. But to be perfectly honest, whiteboard time is really busy. So, you know, we're frantically running around, we're giving hints, we're managing students. If you're me, you're nagging your students to speak French while you're doing it. So I definitely don't go into an activity going, oh, I'm gonna be able to check off something for every kid. It's just certain ones. But the beautiful thing is when I go to that spreadsheet and I see the colors and the lack of colors, I go, oh shoot, I need to go see that kid because I haven't been paying enough attention to them, or I haven't gotten around to them, or they're really quiet about their work. So that's kind of how my in-person, like at the moment stuff goes. I also try to get them to do journal entries. And I find the journal entries really capture the work that they do, and it slows it down for me. So I can do it at my own pace on my own time. And I keep the journals if they're not writing in them. So if I don't finish going through all their journals before I need them to do another one, it's no big deal. I can always go back and capture that. So for example, this week I've had my students working on math equals love 2022 problem. Can you create the numbers 1 through 100 using only 2, 0, 2, and 2 exactly one time each? And they weren't at whiteboards right now because we're in rows and all that not fun stuff. But I had them the next day after we were working on it, talk about an error. And so I said, and if you didn't make a mistake, here's a mistake that somebody put up. So I put it up there. I said, what's going on? And so this student here actually showed me what the mistake was, and then actually figured out what that student was probably trying to do, which was only 2 of the students were able to get that far. But I got to see that because they did this journal entry after. So I often will get my students to tell me the story of how they solved the problem, what was a mistake they found, what are they proud of. Sometimes for math talks, I might say, okay, for this ST mystery, how many bouncy balls are in the vase? And why did you change your estimation? What clues led you to change your estimation? I also evaluate or assess students on quizzes. We're trying a quiz every 2 weeks. And again, because we're interleaving, it's a little bit of questions from all the different things we've been working on. And our quizzes are sometimes collaborative and sometimes individual. So right here, you see 3 students working at a whiteboard, and that's actually on a quiz that they were doing. I gave them some questions to work on, and when they were happy with the representation, they went and they copied it down. So again, it's in writing, so it's a little bit like on my time when I get around to marking. I also assess conversations, again, especially if it's someone where I realize I haven't heard their voice, I haven't seen them as much, then I have a conversation, and projects as well. What I really hope to get to at some point is portfolios. We haven't done it yet. Again, I had a student teacher last term, so we're kind of starting to get into things with me. But my hope is that with them being able to see my navigation tool and what I have seen from them, that they can look at that and find gaps and say, hey, you know what, Madame Chu doesn't have a record of me showing these skills, and so I'm going to pick artifacts, examples of my work that show that I do know those skills to this level. So as I'm doing this, the students are also keeping track of their work. So this is from the Building Thinking Classrooms book again, and it shows the example on the left is where it gives examples of what a basic, intermediate, and advanced understanding of those skills would look like. And the example on the right is textbook questions, for example, that represent those levels of understanding. In my class, because we're interleaving and the thought of preparing all of that in advance was super overwhelming, my students got a blank grid, one for each strand. And as we work through it, and they do check their understanding questions, they fill in their their navigational tool with the I can statements. And at the end of every check your understanding question sheet they get, I list what the skills are and what levels they are. So I give them time in class to check their work and to record in the tool. Because if I don't give them time, they tend to get this really blank look when I bring it up, as if I've never talked about it before. There are a few tricky things with this. The first one is technical stuff. So when we go to this page here, you see this URL. A tech-savvy student can change true to false. And what ends up happening is you can actually see all of the published sheets. So that can be a problem for sure. I use class numbers, but the students know each other's numbers. So that is definitely something to keep in mind. My class is really sweet and really innocent this year. It's not something I worry about. A way around it is to publish as a PDF and post the PDF, which can't be modified, so that the students can still see it. The downside of posting a PDF is just that you have to do it more regularly. When I post this as a website, it updates as I update the spreadsheet. So it's just one less thing for me to do. Another one is I intended to use this with the iPad as I walked around, and to be perfectly frank, the iPad was a little finicky with the Google Sheets, and so I just stopped with that and just take notes on a Post-it or a scrap piece of paper or my own mini whiteboard and then fill it in later. Sorting. So sorting the questions sometimes in terms of what's basic, intermediate, and advanced is still something that confuses me with some of the concepts. I think that it's kind of nuanced. Some things are more obvious to me. So equivalent fractions, as I mentioned, from 20 to 100 to me is like, I understand that's more basic, whereas maybe with like something over 7 is a little more complicated. But there are definitely other ones that I find a little trickier to organize. And to get around that, I just pull out a textbook. The students don't have textbooks, but I use questions from the textbook. And I just go, okay, what questions are at the top and what are at the middle and what are at the bottom? And then I kind of use that to help me gauge what's more basic, intermediate, and advanced. A big one is time. A lot of people will look at my spreadsheet and just blank and go like, that's too much work. That's going to take too much time. And there are definitely moments where I'm like, oh, that's a lot. But actually, I find in many ways this saves me time. When I would collect exit slips or journal entries in the past, I would sit there sometimes and go, oh, like, is this proficient? Is it proficient extending? Like, oh, but what did I give that other kid who had something similar? I can't remember. And so I'd waste a lot of that time trying to figure out where to put it. And then later I would get to report card time and I would ask myself, well, they got proficient. What can they do? So I'd have to go to Fresh Grade, pull up the picture of the assignment, look at the assignment and figure out what skills they showed me and what I was still looking for. Whereas this spreadsheet, like it's checked off for me. Like, hey, guess what? They can find equivalent fractions. They can convert from fractions to decimals to percentages. And like the descriptive language is right there. I also have to remind myself that it's okay that I don't need to give check marks for every student for everything we do. And as students show me that they're really comfortable and they have their consecutive check marks, I don't have to spend as much time on their work, or maybe they don't need to do that particular assignment. And maybe I can just go chat with the students where I see, oops, there's a lot of white space. I haven't filled something in for them. So in a way, it helps me prioritize my time. The last confusing or tricky thing is communication. Whether you're communicating with administration, parents, or students. I've really been lucky. My administration has always trusted me with this, so I haven't had to worry about it. I have had conversations with parents, not particularly about math assessment, but just the transition to proficiency scale language. But typically I find if the parents recognize that I am still able to fill out their honors forms for that private school that demands percentages with no problem, they usually go, okay, that's fine, I understand. Or I don't understand, but I'm okay with what you're doing. But really, I try to communicate to them the idea here is growth, and that I can actually show more of what their children can do if I can check off what outcomes they are achieving, as opposed to just saying, yeah, it's a 7 out of 10, or it's a developing / proficient. And for students, so this year I did have a student ask me as I was showing all this, why do we do this? And I kind of walked the class through similar examples to what I showed you. And by the end, they all just kind of went, oh, okay, that's great. And they seem pretty happy with it. So far, so it's good, but we haven't had a report card yet, so we'll see. That's my little spiel. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Michelle. That was really great. I'm really impressed by your Google Sheet. I've got a similar system set up, but you've kind of taken yours to another level. So I'd love to have another look at that at some point. We're going to save questions for Michelle until the third part of our session this afternoon, and we're going to open up breakout rooms now. So these breakout rooms, I'm going to open them up and we're going to see what you guys see on your screens. So there are 5 different breakout rooms. You should be able to click on the breakout room button at the bottom and choose which breakout room you'd like to enter into. And so you can just join the breakout room of your choice. And we're going to have conversations about what Michelle has talked to us about, as well as things that you guys we're all working on in our own classrooms, questions that we have. If you have questions about joining the breakout rooms, let me know. Keep joining those breakout rooms, everybody. Okay, just a few more people. So Phil, you were going to go into the outcomes based, the 10 to 12. I'm going to come and join you once most people have figured out how to get into breakout rooms.
Hi, Susan.
Hi, Jess.
Clearly, I can't figure it out. What do
Okay,
we
which one? Okay, so you're going to choose a breakout room. So there are 2 different topics. You can either go into a breakout room that's talking about assessing curricular competencies, or you can go into a breakout room that's talking about outcomes-based assessment. And then you can choose which grade level you'd like to discuss, like other people you'd like to discuss with. So for the competencies, there's a K to 8 group and a 9 to 12 group. And then the outcomes, there's a 6 to 9, a 10 to 12.
Oh,
and
I
there
do
should be a
remember
K to 5.
seeing that. It must be in a different email from where my
Which one? Which do you want to talk about curricular competencies, or would you like to talk about outcomes-based assessment?
Let's talk about competencies.
Now, which competencies? So do you want to be in the K to 8 group or the 9 to 12 group?
K to 8.
Okay, so I'm going to assign you to the competencies K to 8 group.
Thank you.
And now you can go in there. And if anyone else needs any help joining a breakout room, let me know. Otherwise, I am going to go in and join a breakout room as well.
Okay, looks like the other groups are still in their breakout. I imagine that will be coming back soon. Anybody here, feel free to continue the conversations, or if you have any questions, things you wonder about, feedback to the BCMT about anything you think we might want to hear about how the series is going for you or things to do in the future. Or we can just chill for a couple minutes until other people come back. That's all up to you. And teachers who were in my group, I was just looking back at the comments and I forgot about that math dictionary thing that came up. What we have in Surrey, actually, we haven't, this was done for the previous curriculum and they haven't been updated. It's probably something we should do. We put together these word walls that were used across schools and so on. So for example, if I go like grade 4, let's just give you a plan. They were designed to be visual and covering the main vocabulary across the grade. Again, this is not up to date with the new curriculum, but you know, what is a pattern rule? So describe it, give an example. This is an equation. This is what a solution is. So trying to avoid just word definitions and instead trying to visually get across the idea. And so I know a lot of teachers use this. Some just posted a bunch of things on the wall, but others use them much more intentionally with, as new language got to be brought in, they would, you know, have the card. And so they could print these in color at our print shop. And then get on cardstock. And so those were quite popular back a few years ago, but maybe it's something we should really update with maybe make it digital instead. So just thought I'd show that because you were bringing up that sort of dictionary idea. Oh, I didn't share my screen. You didn't even get to see it. Okay. All right, I will quickly share my screen as other people are coming back. I was describing it. There we go. So this is the kind of what it looks like for each of the key things, a visual thing for the vocabulary.
Yeah, that would be super helpful.
Yeah, probably a lot of them could stay where they are, but a few things have moved around. So, but I can certainly share what we have. I'm going to put my school email address in the chat. If you'd like me to share those files, again, out of date, but still pretty good. We made our own decision to come back, thinking it was about time to come back, but
no, my computer died, and now when I restarted, I ended up with you.
Okay.
Is it the main group then? Because it
This
looked
is
like you were.
Yeah, well, I brought my group back here, thinking, you know, I think it's time that we should be back by now. And yet we were the only group back, so I was just sharing something else to our K-5 group.
Yeah, I saw.
That didn't feel like a minute. I had a 1 minute warning, and then 5 seconds later, I got whipped.
So Zoom has this bug, and I think the way the bug works is if you're in a room, and if you're the host and you're in a room and you decide to close all groups and then you leave the room, it sucks everybody back.
Sucks everybody back.
I think that's the hack.
Sorry, everybody. I sucked you into the vortex.
That's good to know. I can use that power.
Yeah.
Oh, so I guess we're all back now. There are no more breakout rooms happening.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So I think we've been here for over an hour. So hey, excellent stamina, everyone. Like, I don't know, it's been everyone I talked to is pretty darn tired at the moment. And so thank you for lasting this long and having, it's so nice to be able to come together and have these conversations. And so now's a chance for anyone who hasn't had an opportunity to ask Michelle any more questions about her presentation. And if nobody has questions, we'll just sort of wait until people start to leave the meeting, I guess.
Oh, your wait time wasn't nearly long enough.
No, okay.
There are questions out there. We had great questions in our group with Michelle, so I know there's other people who have great questions.
And or some people mentioned getting to see the slides in more detail. If you just email me, I will send you a copy of all the stuff I showed you, and then you can make your own copies and view it there or edit as your own copy.
Should we put your email address in the
Yeah,
chat?
I put it in, but I'll do it again.
So let me ask a question then, so that we can kickstart this. Michelle, how do you think what you were talking about with the outcomes-based assessment would look different if you weren't interleaving? Like if you were teaching one unit at a time, how would it look different for you?
In some ways, I think it would make it easier to see which students I was not seeing as much of, because I imagine that there would be a chunk of those I can statements, and I would have a lot more filled in for the, say, the numeracy strand, or a lot, or like integers, for example, or a lot more filled in for measurement. So I would spot it a little bit sooner for which kids I needed to see more of.
Right. There's more density when you do it unit by unit.
And less retention.
Nice comeback there, Roz.
What about that Google spreadsheet? Was that something that was fairly easy for you to put together, especially linking it to the other one, or is that something that took a dozen YouTube tutorials?
No, it was pretty okay. I can't fully remember exactly how much effort it was, because it was, you know, like yesterday felt like a really long time ago. So yeah. June feels like a really, really long time ago.
Yeah.
But from what Richard sent me, it was fairly easy to figure out how to make the changes I needed to make to incorporate the objectives as well as the proficiency standards. So
I really like how it's a live document that everybody can see as it's being updated. I think that's fairly nifty.
Yeah, I love that. And I hope that nobody else figures out that if they just change the URL, they can
well, you shouldn't have told us.
Well, no, we need to know. The students don't need to know.
Richard actually found another workaround for that.
Okay.
So that might be worth checking out.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't remember exactly what it is. It's more complicated, but there's another workaround for that.
Well, I think having them, the students numbered is kind of a nice backup just in case. Hopefully most students wouldn't be able to identify what number they were.
Also, to be perfectly honest, it's not actually all that interesting to anybody else. Like,
yeah, it's not like you're sharing scores out of 100, right? Like that to me is something that can be a little more intimidating. You know, these are all progressions or proficiencies, so
yeah,
a little more less
steps
hard.
on a journey, and they're all on different journeys.
Yeah,
so
that's right. Yeah.
Michelle, on your list, how would you adapt for somebody who's like on a SPED or an IEP when you have your statements already laid out?
Oh, so that would be something I put in tricky things, because I learned that I got a little over enthusiastic in creating all the different students. And after I created the first one, and I realized after that, you know, oh, I want to actually divide this objective into 2 parts, or I want to change it. That does take a little bit of time to modify. So I would, if it was like a particular student who had some kind of modification or was on a different plan, I would probably just create their own sheet with the outcomes that we've laid out for them. I admit I don't have it happen too often in late French. Typically students who join are don't necessarily fall into that category. The student that I first showed you, the student number 1, is one who does not, like when I have a chance to work with her one-on-one, we're working on what subtraction means. And so I am still able to find things that she can do. I also lower down have the curricular competencies, and those are definitely things that I can record her doing when we work together. There's a question in the chat that talks about giving the students blank forms. So that's their navigational tools. And I would actually keep it blank in the future. I actually have some that I pre-filled out once I created my I can statements in case, but I actually really like having them write it down because it kind of reinforces for them what the skills are, because they don't actually think about necessarily what the different parts are. So if they're like, oh, I can represent integers, and so they associate the skill with the question a little bit more as they have to write it down.
Would you have them are you going to have them fill out that sheet at the beginning, like of your spiraling, or do you have it go onwards and have several sheets open?
Yeah, so what we did at the beginning of the year is we created a binder just for math, and we put in 5 dividers and labeled each one with a strand. So numeracy, fractions, geometry, probability, and algebra. And in each of them, they started out with a blank, not a blank, but a template for note-taking. And I have tons of extra copies for as we need to take more notes, as well as a blank navigational grid. And so as we move from topic to topic, I just highlight up on the board after we do the activity what strand we're working on, and then as we work on the check your understanding questions, they flip to the appropriate section and fill it in. I try not to tell them beforehand though, so they're not they don't feel constrained in approaches to take for whatever problem we're working on.
Thank you.
Michelle, when we saw your spreadsheet briefly, but it looked like you had quite a number of outcomes. And I was just curious what sort of process you went through to decide how many and when to distinguish one outcome from another.
So I just pulled up the curriculum and went through the content and then asked myself, from all the times I've taught this, like what are the different skills they need to get to these outcomes. And that's how I kind of created them. And they're organized again by strand to make it easier for me to find them. But really, I also just, I would do things like I'd pull out the textbook and look at objectives and use those to help me as well.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, I'll ask a question that was asked in our group that I think others might be interested in. You said at the end of your presentation you haven't had to do a report card yet. So I think people would like to know how that's possible. And the second thing is, knowing what your answer is, how did you make use of this to produce the reports that you have to?
So we didn't have an official report card. It was an interim report that we did for first term. So Burnaby piloted this last year and luckily continued again. So we were asked to comment on student behavior and provide some feedback on how the students are doing with literacy and numeracy. So for numeracy, it was really easy because I just went to my spreadsheet and I'd look for the student and say, oh, so-and-so is able to, and I could just copy down translate and copy down the objective and just write it out that way. So in terms of the comment for that was a lot easier. And it's actually, I'll be doing the same thing for report cards as well when it comes up. I'll just also have to put some kind of dot on a line or fill in a proficiency scale thing And that's where, as we get closer, I'll kind of looking at a general sense of overall where they're falling on the objectives. And then I'll use my teacher know-how to translate that into something on the proficiency scale. But I find we typically have a sense of where the students are with you know, a little bit of give or take on either end. But having the spreadsheet just justifies to me and makes it easier to justify to other people why I'm giving them what I'm giving them.
Well, if there are no more questions for Michelle, and if there are, just interrupt me, I don't mind. I'm also curious, what did people who are here think of our slightly different format this time of having those breakout groups where, you know, it wasn't a formal presentation, just time to connect with colleagues around in a similar area or age group that you do. What did you think of that? And is that something we should try again in the future?
You know, when this assessment series actually started at the end of after the fall conference in 2020, oh my goodness, the idea was that it would put like-minded people together so they can start collaborating, connecting. And the idea here was to, okay, let's go back to those roots. Let's get people who are interested in the same topic in the same room together. And you saw each other, you saw each other's faces. Feel free to reach out to each other. If you're going on the same path, connect with each other, walk alongside someone, reach out and get some advice from different people. The idea is that the interaction is supposed to become more continuous rather than these sort of discrete events that happen throughout the year.
There's a whole bunch of us who are going to visit Phil in Vancouver once things have stabilized.
Please come, please come. I feel like I've been all by myself for so long. Nothing against my colleagues in my own school, but we haven't had any. I had a parent meeting and I had to go through like ridiculous red tape to get a parent on campus for a pretty serious issue. In fact, I was like, let's just meet at a coffee shop. This is going to be so much easier to deal with. So I can't wait for that day to kind of open up campus again. I'm sure everyone's the same, but yeah, I'd love to have people swing by and see what we're doing at Crofton.
There you go. That's the connections we want happening.
Although Kim mentioned that this is a nice way to connect even when we are able to travel, just because like it's been really nice having these short little meetings and we can join in from wherever we are without the hassle of travel. And so certainly from, you know, the perspective of living on a small island, travel is long. It takes a long time to get anywhere from where I am. And so I've really appreciated being able to talk with people from all over the place. And so yes, we are really hopeful we can start meeting in person, but we can see some benefits of keeping these, you know, quick little webinars, chances to check in virtually as a way to navigate through into the future, hopefully.
But keep in mind that today we heard Michelle share about what it's like for her when the rubber hits the ground for her, right? But it's when the rubber starts to hit the ground for you. That's when you want to be able to have someone that you can talk to and connect with and so on and so forth. And whether that's a virtual meeting or an in-person meeting, it's just so nice to have someone else to talk to when you hit those hurdles. Or speed bumps, I guess, would be a better way to not mix the metaphor.
That's so true. I remember reading in I can't remember if I read it or if I saw a video, but it's Dylan Willem, I don't know, like 10 years ago. And one of his quotes or one of his observations about working inside the black box and formative assessment was saying how for it to be any chance for it to be successful in a school, say, teachers need to collaborate. And I don't know how it came up the number, but it was something like a minimum of 70 minutes a month with 8 people or something like this. But who knows whatever that number is, but the point is well taken that if you're going down this path and you don't have someone to collaborate with or bounce ideas off of, you're kind of, you could be in for a pretty tough road, pretty lonely, but so stuff like this is awesome for sure.
Find your assessment buddy.
Yeah.
Bruce, that's a good question. How many have we had?
10. I looked it up.
Oh, good.
7 last year. This is the 3rd.
We should get T-shirts for people who make it through to, I don't know, whatever the number is. It's becoming quite the club.
How about tattoos?
42.
Better.
Yeah, sure, a tattoo, and then as you attend a new one, you just etch out the other number. I think we should use like hash marks. That way it makes it easy.
Yeah.
And I
Definitely not Roman numerals.
No.
I think we've planned another 2, right? Like our plan is to do one in February and then another one in April. Although I don't think we've finalized the speakers or topics, but similar format.
Yeah, definitely similar format. But yeah, we're not sure yet who's going to be our presenters.
Anybody's got something to share?
Yeah.
Send us a message.
Let us know.
Something that came across my desk, I guess last week, was the ministry, and maybe you guys already talked about it. I came in late. Ministry came out with their executive summary of the survey they did about assessment. So the survey across the province for teachers, maybe, I guess teachers, families, no, actually students. So it was teachers, students, parents, and administrator managers. Did everybody else see that summary?
No, I didn't know they'd released that. I knew they did the survey. I didn't know that they released the results.
I could probably get the link. Do people want to see the link?
Yeah, that'd be great.
I can put it in the chat, but but make sure you have your flak jacket on and be in good positive spirits, because it's not fantastic.
I'm sure they had nothing but good things to say.
Oh yeah, my joke when I saw it was the only thing that would have made it worse is if they added a question in the survey about adding more bike lanes to Vancouver or something. Okay, let me find that link.
I know one thing that came across my desk. This is on a little bit of a different topic, but kind of similar. When we're struggling by ourselves and we're wondering how to make some ends in our own building, with whatever kind of changes are going on, but in particular, say math assessment. One thing that was suggested to me by someone else in my department, and we've tried it this year when we've had some department time together. We've prioritized doing some math together. And so one person is responsible for bringing a question to class, as it were, to the class of teachers. And then we spend like 10 minutes just playing around with kind of a thinking classroom kind of approach to a question. And it's kind of fun to do like a calc question or a stats question that's, you haven't maybe done in a while, or some kind of neat little twist. And we start every department meeting like that. And, we have meetings every 2 or 3 weeks approximately at my school. And there's, as I said, about 7 of us. And it's just made such a difference because you feel again a little bit like a student. You feel like, you know, oh, I'm getting assessed, and what other approaches are there? And, you know, you're kind of looking around to see that, am I getting the right answer, and all those kinds of things, and just reminds you and kind of opens up conversation about a whole bunch of different things that, you know, we just expect our students to be able to do as well. So it's been a kind of a fun change to add to our otherwise kind of boring staff meetings. So just a thought.
There's more to this than that, Phil. I've actually done some research on this, and it's professional learning is richer if the people in the room have had a shared experience. And so there's an example to have a shared experience, right? Now we have sort of abstract shared experience. We've all taught that student or all dealt with that parent, or, you know, but those are sort of not exactly the same shared experience. We have common experiences that way, but to have really something that is common for all of us, it gives us something to talk about and something to launch from.
And it makes everybody feel included, right? So, you know, you got a new teacher, or you've got, you know, a new to the profession or a new to the department teacher, and they're offering up a question and you're trying it and playing around with it, or vice versa. You're in a group with them on, you know, the first meeting of the year, and you don't really know them all that well. Like it's gone a long way to building team, for sure, too.
Well, Susan, do we want to wrap this up?
It's 5:03.
I think it's a good time. I think, yeah, it's been an hour and a half. It was a quick hour and a half.
Just went like that.
Yeah, so thanks for joining us, everyone.
Is that what you've earned, Mike, or is that how much you drank during this session?
No. Don't never drink during a session. It's how much I've earned. It's in the pocket.
All
Okay.
right. Thanks,
All right.
everybody.
Cool.
Yeah, thanks,
Take
everyone.
care, everyone.
Nice chatting with everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Take care.
Are any of us sticking around for a minute, or should we just?
Sure. Who pressed the record button?
Oh, I have to stop the record button.
Yeah.